Earlier this week, we talked about the biggest questions facing the Cincinnati Bengals offense, but there might be bigger questions on defense. Let's break it down.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. I'm your host, Jake Lisco. He's your host, James Rapine. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, and you can find this podcast on YouTube and everywhere you get your podcasts. Any audio platform out there that has podcasts, we should be there. And if you're new to the show, well, you can join the many everydayers or the many people out there that make us their first listen, and shout out to all you folks who have made us a regular part of your routine. And today's episode is sponsored by Game Time, where you can get $20 off your first purchase of tickets with promo code LOCKEDONNFL. Terms apply. We'll be talking about the biggest questions facing the Cincinnati Bengals on defense this year. And I want to start, James, with the question of, the most important player on the team is on offense, but are the bigger questions facing this team on the defensive side of the ball this year?
I think bigger is relative because we know the straw that stirs the drink, but there's certainly more. There are more questions and more concerns. If I had to go up against, the concerns on offense and put all those out, which again, check out that episode from earlier this week. We talked about the questions facing this offense moving forward, or this defense where they were bad last year. Say it like it is. They were bad last year. They couldn't stop the run, and they had DJ Reader. They had a true nose tackle that's a Pro Bowler from a skill standpoint, from an on-field standpoint, year in and year out, and plays at that level when he's healthy. And so now you have Sheldon Rankins, who's an upgrade in some areas, but not others. And you have two young guys that you're going to be banking on. And so that alone, I think, is where people go. But there are a ton of other questions outside of just the defensive tackle room that I have. And so, I think defense, there are more questions. I wonder if this defense, and we can dive into these in more depth, but just high level, will they evolve? Will they change? We talk about the offense and the evolution there. Will this defense just look the same? Will things feel different? Will it look different? Will long-term veterans be playing in different roles? I think there are a lot of questions facing Lou Anarumo's group, and they have to figure it out because, like I said, to lead, they were bad last year, and they can't be as inconsistent and play as poor as they did for most of last season this year.
The biggest individual question, to your point, James, might be on offense, and it's probably just, how does Joe Burrow play? That is the biggest question for the year. But in terms of uncertainty, in terms of chances that things are not fixed, that's where I think maybe the bigger issues for the Bengals to solve are on defense. I'm relatively confident, and you can go back to that episode to hear us talk about this more, that Joe Burrow is going to be Joe Burrow, and he'll figure it out. If he doesn't, there's a much bigger problem facing this team. But once you get past that, to me, the biggest questions are on defense. So maybe the biggest individual question is on offense, but when you get to the accumulation of questions or the likelihood that these questions aren't adequately answered, that's where my concern level is, I think, higher on the defensive side of the ball, because you mentioned how they played last year. They were the worst team in the NFL in yards per play allowed last year in the regular season at 6 yards per play. They were the 21st ranked scoring defense last year, which is better than dead last, but still not great. Bottom third of the NFL, bottom half of the NFL or so in points allowed. And as you highlighted, James, run defense was a major issue for them. The 4th worst run defense in the NFL on a yards per carry basis. And that was with DJ Reader being around for at least part of the season. We talked a lot about the defensive tackle depth. We talked a little bit at times this offseason about the linebackers needing to play better, and part of that needs to be the defensive line in front of them needing to play better. But the linebackers also, who were really good 2 years ago, good enough that the Bengals decided to bring Jermaine Pratt back, were not as good last year. And part of that is the situation around them deteriorating, Sam Hubbard playing on one leg and all these things. That contributes to the run defense problem. But in addition to that, you're also talking about a secondary overhaul where you may have two new starting safeties this year, and they're trying to figure out what to do with the first round pick from a couple years ago in Dax Hill, because he's not going to be a starting safety barring unforeseen circumstances between now and the regular season opener. They need a corner too. Is DJ Turner going to take that step? And you're asking these questions about a secondary that, yeah, there were problems in run defense last year, but they were also giving up explosive plays way too often, to the point that they had this pressure to go bring back Von Bell and bring in Geno Stone. So from a high level, you look at the stats from last year to this year, you look at some of the player changes they've had, losing DJ Reader, adding Sheldon Rankins, the change ups in the secondary, needing to get more out of the linebackers. And I have questions at every single level. We haven't even talked about getting a pass rush outside of Trey Hendrickson yet, which is another question, right? That they need to find adequate answers to. At least on offense, it's like we kind of know what they've got there to a large degree. At least is how I feel. And then when I look at this defense, it's like, oh, question, 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 question.
What are you more questioning, more concerned about more? The defensive tackle room or cornerback?
Yeah, I actually don't know what order I would go with that. I was grappling with that question as I was putting together the on today's show rundown for all of our YouTube viewers. Like, which of those bullet points should go first? Which of those is actually more important? Is it defensive line stuff with the transition from DJ Reader to some very different stylistic defensive tackles, and hoping Sam Hubbard can be more like himself and looking for a jump for Miles Murphy and some of the other defensive edge depth players? Or is it, well, I think Cam Taylor-Britt is actually a CB2 right now. I need to see more from him before I'm really confident about him as a CB1. I love Mike Hilton in the slot. There's still some coverage ceiling stuff with Mike Hilton, although he was amazing last year, the best player I think they had in the secondary. You have the major safety changes and a battle for the other corner position. I think I actually lean to secondary now that I say all that out loud, because there's just more moving parts and less known quantity to me at the DB spots and the defensive line spots, even though I do think the defensive line performance might end up being more impactful to the overall defensive unit. They're more things that I don't know about, I think, when you look at the secondary.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting debate. And to me, they prioritized the right one in the draft when they did. You get Chris Jenkins. There aren't many defensive tackles out there, Calais Campbell aside, that you could say, all right, well, go get him. And there certainly aren't many nose tackles. So it was tough. So I get why they added the guys they did in the draft. But when you wait until round 5 to get Josh Newton at corner, well, now it's still a major question mark, because you're banking on Dax Hill to either impress so much, and I do think he's getting more comfortable there and will continue to, and who knows, right? Or you're banking on DJ Turner, who started off hot, and I think clearly is talented, clearly is going to be an NFL player and probably a good NFL player. But is he ready to start week in and week out? Was getting picked on at the end of the year last year. And so it's tough. Has some physical limitations that you wonder about. And so, yeah, I'm surprised that we're here as we record this on June 5th, and they haven't addressed corner with a veteran, given the fact that they didn't take Quinyon Mitchell in round 1, or all those scenarios we had pre-draft where they go out and invest a high pick in a corner. That didn't happen. And they haven't invested big money on corner either. So I think that that's interesting. Let's continue the secondary conversation. We'll dive into the defensive tackle conversation as well. You hit on a bunch of stuff, and well, I think this proves it, Jake. There are a ton of questions surrounding this defense. So we'll continue coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by our sponsor, BetterHelp. Sometimes we need the opportunity to get something off our chest. Big, small, certain things can really start to get to you. It's important to let that out, especially to someone who's unbiased in your life. So today, well, it's time, if you've thought about discussing your problems, what's going on in your life with someone, whether they're big, whether they're small. Maybe it's something as small as concern about the Bengals defense. As wild as that sounds, a lot of people are concerned. Maybe it's the concern of Joe Burrow's health, which sent social media into a firestorm for a few hours on Tuesday. Whatever it is, BetterHelp can help you. Therapy can be different for everyone. Most of us have bigger problems than our favorite sports team and whether or not Joe Burrow is going to be healthy. And it's important to get things off of your chest once in a while. And so if you thought about starting therapy, well, try BetterHelp. It's entirely online. It's designed to be flexible, suited to your schedule. And so whether you're traveling for work or whether you're homebound, it doesn't matter the schedule. Whether you have 52 kids, it doesn't matter. BetterHelp is going to fit in your schedule. So visit betterhelp.com/lockedon and get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/lockedon.
Continuing the topic of the secondary, I think the reason that it might be the top question is because we're talking about a couple of positions here. It is a unit. The corners and the safeties very much go hand in hand. And when we talk about pass defense, a lot of that comes to how those guys are communicating. We saw those issues last year and how those guys are playing individually in coverage. I mentioned the Bengals' placement in yards per attempt in rushing last year. Their net yards per attempt in pass defense was the worst in the NFL, giving up 7.1 net yards per pass attempt. That includes sacks to bring the number down. So it's not just yards per pass attempt, it's including yards per dropback. So if there's sacks mixed in there, that number goes down. The two best teams in the NFL, by the way, in net yards per pass attempt, the Baltimore Ravens and Cleveland Browns last year, followed by the Kansas City Chiefs at number 3. So some of the Bengals competitors in the AFC on the other end of the spectrum. And so it's not just, do they have the guys in the right roles? That's a big part of the question. Can Geno Stone elevate their play out of the safety level? Does the return of Von Bell patch up communication issues if he ends up being the starting safety? And how much does that help with a group that's still pretty young, especially at corner outside of Mike Hilton? Their outside corner still going to be pretty young, although we're talking about Cam Taylor-Britt stepping into a bigger leadership role in the team, and the team is confident in his ability to take a step this year. That whole unit needs to be so much better. The gap between the Bengals' overall pass defense results last year and the explosive plays they were allowing last year and the good defenses in the NFL, and it's not just the secondary, but it's a huge gap. And so that's where I think it needs to start, is these changes they've made to the safety room and this competition at corner and these high draft picks that they've invested at outside corner, second round picks in Dax Hill. Those guys need to be better, and we need to see those answers. And until we get those answers, that's why it's a question for me and a big question for this defense.
Well, the safety room should be much better, right? For whatever reason, whatever the struggles were last year, why they struggled, why Nick Scott couldn't hit the ground running, why Dax Hill ended the season on a whimper after starting pretty strong. Well, now you have Geno Stone. You bring back Von Bell. We know what he brings. And so Jordan Battle can be that competitor for Bell, but honestly, I think he's going to be Bell's backup. And I think Tyson Anderson is probably going to be Geno Stone's backup. And those are your 4 safeties. And that room should be better. Now, is it better? How much better than Dax Hill and Geno Stone, or than Dax Hill again? Or that's where it gets interesting, where the big question is, can Dax Hill prove himself at outside corner? Because if he does, it can calm a lot of these waters, and it answers that question. And if he doesn't have the size limitations that DJ Turner has, right? And so it's like, all right, well, if Turner's your third outside corner, that makes a ton of sense. Even if you're worried about Cam Taylor-Britt in whether or not he's a true CB1, my question would be more about health for Cam. He's missed time in each of the past 2 years. And so when we talk about corner, it's just not CB2. It's just depth behind those guys. And who are you banking on? And DJ Ivy's coming back from an ACL. We mentioned Josh Newton. He's a 5th round pick. How much are you banking on him early in the year? But I think the safety room is hopefully what the Bengals are looking for. So that eases the minds of, say, the linebackers, and it goes hand in hand there, where
Mhm.
the linebackers who were worried last year, certainly Jermaine Pratt, I mean, he talked about it on the record some, worried about what was going on behind him. Hopefully that ends now. And hopefully he doesn't have to worry about that and can worry about what's in front of him, because it's going to be tough. I don't think it's going to be 2021 and even 2022 where they are going to be clean. I think they're going to have to deal with defensive tackles and defensive linemen, or offensive linemen, excuse me, in offensive tackles and guards and centers bearing down on them. And they're going to have to find ways to make plays in the run game regardless. So that is a major factor, I think, is the linebackers being better, even if the defensive tackle room isn't what it was in 2022 when DJ Reader was healthy.
And that's why I'm not as focused on the linebackers. While I brought it up as a question, and I think it is a question for this defense, how will those guys play? Is it closer to 2 years ago, or is it closer to last year? It's probably going to be somewhere in the middle. They're so much a product of their surroundings. And so that's why, to me, the bigger questions are, as you point out, behind them and in front of them. If they're not as worried about safety stuff, and Lou Anarumo talked about it as well, that the linebackers were affected by the safeties and the communication behind them,
They
then
can't be, though. I think that's the element. You paid those guys, so
sure.
they can't be. I don't care. Like this year, they cannot worry about what's behind them, and hopefully Von Bell and Geno Stone can handle it.
But regardless of whether they should or shouldn't, you hope that that is elevated. You hope that the things that they've changed around the linebackers allows them to play freer, allows them to play in the roles that they were very comfortable with 2 years ago, where they were successful, and it just elevates the level. These guys need to trust each other in general, and maybe that's what it comes down to. Maybe that's the simple answer for the linebacker and defensive back communication is they need to trust that they know what everyone is doing on the field, and that they're comfortable with their teammates doing their jobs. And when everybody knows that their teammates are doing what they're supposed to be doing, they can play freer, they can play better, and the communication, even in play, pre-snap, whatever it is, can be better, and you should see a better result on the field. That's why, to me, the linebackers, while yeah, they need to play better, it's not one of the bigger questions for me. It's something that I'm paying more lip service to and talking about it at a shallower level, to me, than some of these other questions on defense.
Sure, the other ones are more important, but those guys are, they're the new DJ Reader. They're the new, they're Sam Hubbard and Trey Hendrickson. Like they're the guys that the Bengals invested in, the veterans. It's a young defense, and so they need to be better. And so hopefully, regardless of what's going on now, they should be better. And Geno, like, why wouldn't Geno Stone and Von Bell prevent those big plays and do what we expect them to do? Or Jordan Battle, for that matter. If he beats out Von Bell, then he's earned the trust. All of those things. I'm not dismissing that. I just think Bell has a sizable advantage. And so the other element here in how you help the corners, how you help the secondary, is that defensive line room, is that pass rush. And I think there's a huge question or questions there as well. So let's continue the conversation and discuss the pass rush a bit coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is the app you need to download right now. If you haven't downloaded it yet, we've talked about Game Time on Locked On Bengals for a long time now, and it's because you're going to be able to get the tickets you want, whether it's the NBA Finals, which they're probably starting now, depending on when you're listening to this or watching, starting on Thursday, whether it's the NBA Finals, though, whether it's a Major League Baseball game, whether you want to get ahead of things and get NFL tickets for the 2024 season, Game Time has you covered. They take all the guesswork out of buying tickets. They show you all in prices. They have killer last minute deals. So if you make a snap decision about going to a concert last minute, Game Time is going to have the tickets that you're looking for. And they have views from your seat right from the app. So you know exactly what you're getting. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time, and download the Game Time app, create an account, use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNFL. That's LOCKEDON NFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
As we shift our conversation to the trenches, I want to take a second to say that this isn't meant to be like a doomer podcast. there are questions on defense, but there are reasons they could answer these questions. James, I think you did a good job of highlighting some of that. Like, there are plenty of reasons to think you'll get a second-year step from DJ Turner. The Cam Taylor-Britt will continue on his ascending trajectory, that the replacements and moves they made to improve their safety position should bear immediate benefit, and that could affect the second level and the third level of this defense in a positive way. But until we get those answers, are questions. And that's the same context with which I want to talk about the defense or the defensive line, because while these are questions, we've seen this defense as recently as 2 years ago play well. And even at times last year in some games against good teams, we saw really solid performances from this defense, but they had this inconsistency issue. They had this run defense issue that got worse as the year went on. They had this explosive play issue that never really got all the way fixed. And so we're still talking about questions. As we shift and talk about the defensive line, it was not like they were like a disaster as a pass rushing unit last year. They weren't the worst pass rushing unit in the NFL by any means, the way that we talk about their overall team yards per play averages and stuff like that. But a lot of that's Trey Hendrickson. And so getting more contributions across the line, helping Trey Hendrickson in the pass rush part of the game is a big part of the picture and a big part of the question from the pass rushing side for this defensive line. And then from the run D side, it's going back to the first question you brought up, James, in this podcast, is how are they going to change the way they play their fronts without DJ Reader? How do the Sheldon Rankins and Chris Jenkins additions fit with the players they already have? The McKinley Jacksons, does he make an impact his rookie year? Is Zach Carter still getting a lot of playing time, or have they found players to push him down the depth chart, with BJ Hill being your other presumed starter on the inside? And then, we can talk about where Sam Hubbard going to play. Is Myles Murphy going to get on the field more? But to start with the pass rush, it's who's going to step up and help Trey Hendrickson, who continues to be the motor that drives the Bengals pass rush.
And hopefully it's instantly Sheldon Rankins. Hopefully it's instantly Sam Hubbard for being healthy and just being back to normal. And hopefully it's Myles Murphy. That's the one. And you've talked about it a few times. If he could take a step forward, maybe a major step forward, you know what it does. You want to talk about the optimistic what ifs. That might be, if you could get Rankins to play like Rankins did last year, just that, right? As a pass rusher, I'm being just talking pass rush. And Myles Murphy emerges, shoot. The cornerback room might be okay because they go hand in hand. And you can get after the passer and you can heat up the passer. We know Trey Hendrickson's one of the best edge rushers in the game and going to get after opposing quarterbacks. Can you imagine if Myles Murphy is a double-digit sack guy and Sam Hubbard's healthy and Sheldon Rankins is pushing the interior as much as we anticipate him being able to do? This defense feels much, much different. So of all the things we talked about, Dax Hill emerging, DJ Turner, the questions, it's Cam Taylor-Britt continuing to develop. If this one happens, I think it could have the biggest impact because it is going to be giving up the run sucks, especially in the AFC North. It does. But if you're going to make it to the Super Bowl, if you're going to make it to New Orleans, you got to be able to get to the passer. You got to be able to get after Mahomes in week 2. You got to be able to get after Justin Herbert with the game on the line in Los Angeles when everyone's like, man, if they win this, they're going into the bye. It's going to be feeling really good. And so, yeah, a huge question. And what an impact it would be if you get Rankins being the Rankins that you thought when you paid him in March. Trey Hendrickson is still Trey Hendrickson. And then Myles Murphy emerges and is a real dude on the edge with a healthy Sam Hubbard. That's a fun scenario, Jake, where I look at it. And when you look at the best case scenarios for this defense and the best they can be in 2024, I think in a lot of those scenarios, it's because Myles Murphy emerges and helps this pass rush reach a new level.
Whichever end or head of the coin Myles Murphy's outcome lands on this year is such a big impact for this team. If he does turn into the high-end toolsy, he can be a really disruptive 1B to Trey Hendrickson's 1A, then the sky's the limit for the pass rush. If he's taken those steps and is really eating into Sam Hubbard snaps in a significant way to the point where the Bengals feel like they have to find another way to get Sam Hubbard on the field, if that is a priority for the Bengals. It hasn't been in years past. Maybe this is a year. That's a huge deal. And then they go out and they sign Sheldon Rankins. I think he said this in the locker room. The performance he had against the Bengals last year really helped cement their interest in Rankins. And you look at his performance outside of those games, you probably would like him to be a little bit more consistent. But he is a very different style of player to what the Bengals have had on the defensive interior since Larry Ogunjobi. Really, that was probably the last guy. And perhaps most importantly for the defensive interior is the depth improvements. They, I think, are worse. DJ Reader was the best defensive interior player between the last few years and this year by far. I think when he's healthy, he's just the best. He's a special player. He's hurt right now. Not sure what he's going to be. You talked about the questions and the issues with the free agent class at defensive tackle. And, we lived through the hand wringing over DJ Reader and Tier Tart when they brought him in. And then they signed Sheldon Rankins and all these things. Or maybe it was the opposite order, whatever it is. The improvements to depth. And that's what you're really hoping at least Chris Jenkins is. We'll see with McKinley Jackson. Hopefully he hits and can contribute right away too. But if you don't have to put Zach Carter, Jay Tufele on the field together and watch teams run down your throat, then you're in a better place. And so if your top 4 defensive tackles can be on average better than what they got last year, that's the case for improvement on the defensive interior. But I think that does put a pretty significant question on just how well they can play. Like the ceiling for that group is potentially capped unless Chris Jenkins takes a pretty significant step and hits the ground running as a pro. And sometimes that position can just take a little bit of time. There can be growing pains for defensive tackles coming into the NFL.
And he is one, though, where I would say maybe he does. Maybe he's able to hit the ground running. Maybe Miles Murphy emerges.
Aspects, yeah.
Yeah, maybe Miles Murphy emerges and Hubbard and Cam Sample kick inside more than we anticipate right now. I think there are scenarios, but it is going to look different. And hopefully they've put the right elixir of defensive linemen together, of young and old, or young and experienced, whatever you want to say, along with the talent, to where Lou can dial it up and not just pass rush wise, but they can be effective at stopping the run. And so we'll see if they can do that. But there are plenty of questions, to your point a few minutes ago. A lot of questions about this defense, but there's a lot of talent. It's just got to come together. Lou Anarumo has been able to do that. He's been able to get the most out of some of these guys. Eli Apple was a starting cornerback for this team when Trey Waynes was such a free agent bust, and a rare one because the Bengals have nailed free agency over the past 4 years. So we will see if he can do it again. But there's reason to believe it, but they got to go out and do it. And that'll be all of these questions will be revisited a ton on this podcast between now and the start of the regular season and even after the regular season begins.
And part of those questions, as you point out, is how does Lou put it together? Can they find the answers that they were unable to find last year? Can they patch up whatever the issues were, whether it was the approach that they were taking as a coaching staff in terms of the structure of the defense and calling the right plays and putting guys in advantageous positions to take away big plays, or if it was as simple as they just had crazy chronic communication issues that maybe we're still underselling. We'll probably find out. But putting the defensive line in a position to succeed without DJ Reader is going to be a new challenge for this team. And they've dealt with it in the past because DJ has missed time, and they've got to figure out the skill set of the guys they've got there now, where they do contribute in the best ways to this team. If it's moving some of their defensive ends inside who might be a little bit bigger, a little bit more stout, great. If it's finding ways to use Sheldon Rankins and BJ Hill and Chris Jenkins together and finding the right packages there and the right ways to line those guys up, the right ways to have them shoot gaps, play 2 gaps, or whatever it is, stunts, twists, whatever the elixir is, they will need to find it. And I think that there will probably be a little bit more of a figuring out period on this defensive line, or at least there's a potential for that as they try to figure out the right approach in the trenches. And they've got great coaches. And in my opinion, Marion Hobby is one of the better position coaches on the team, a guy that I certainly have some trust in. And so I do think there's a great chance that he's able to figure that out. to some degree. But like I said, there are reasons to also think there could be an adjusting period while they work through some of those questions, because they're not just questions for us. I would say the team has these questions too, and they're still looking for the answers as well. That's going to do it for this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. We're back next week. This is the final episode of this week, and we'll get ready for mini camp and the end of the Bengals offseason program next week. Until then, thanks for listening to this episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Hoo day, and have a good one.